say, I told you so. That's sort of what we're hearing from all of these other countries. I would love to see a WikiLeaks dump on what goes on inside WikiLeaks. And I would also really like to see a similar information dump in terms of what's going on inside some of the governments that we're talking about. Saudi Arabia, Iran, Central Europe. There's a whole range of countries that would be, in many ways, probably more interesting than the Americans.
How does a lowly, private in a forward operating base about 70 kilometers east of Baghdad get a hold of, not only the 260,000 odd cables, but also a lot of data on operations in Afghanistan and Iraq, as well as some video that you may remember that came out last year from various gun cameras on helicopters. How does that actually happen? Well, I chalk it up to three sort of related factors. The first was after the September 11th attacks, there was a huge outcry about, how did this so-called intelligence failure happen? And the diagnosis came down to a few things, two of the most important of which were a failure of imagination, that the intelligence community simply couldn't imagine an attack of this type would take place because they were too closed off, they didn't think outside of the box enough, et cetera. And two, there was not enough information sharing, and that different parts of the government did not receive information from one another and were therefore not able to, quote, connect the dots. So the response to this was get people to think outside of the box more, and also to make sure that none of these stovepipes or channels were blocked off, and to make information readily available. And this was incorporated into the same law that created the Director of National Intelligence in 2005. So that's one factor, the desire to create outside of the box thinking and the spread of intelligence across the community in order to prevent future attacks. The second was, the same thing that sort of swept over the rest of the world in this time period, the information technology revolution. Not so very long ago, the term cable meant cable, like really, teletype cable, as you would see in an old movie. Now it's all electronic. The same is true of intelligence reporting of all sorts, human intelligence reports, signals intelligence reports. Every kind of report in the world is now electronic. And just as you can now do various Google searches for any number of things, the intelligence community has adopted a similar architecture so that you can go searching for whatever it is you think you need in order to serve that first function, which is to think outside of the box and to share information. So that first factor was amplified 1,000-fold by the ability to harness it to information technology. And the third, and I think why this came out of contingency operating base Hammer in Iraq and not out of the Central Intelligence Agency's headquarters in Langley or Foggy Bottom or any place like that, is you have these two other factors interacting with a military environment. And not just a military environment, but a tactical military environment. So, there are various places you can go in the world now that are essentially a hole in the ground, but it has a classified computer terminal in it. And it literally has access to all of the same stuff that the same terminal sitting in Tampa or Washington would have. So the strictures and guidelines that one would put in place to manage this information, I think almost inevitably become more lax because people are worried about getting killed, not about a security violation. So in PFC Manning's case, he was able to bring in blank CD-ROMs and pretend to be listening to Lady Gaga, which I assure you, having spent 14 plus hours a day, staring at 3 or 4 computer terminals, you need something to keep awake. So everybody has headphones on. This is not unusual.